It was September of 2009. I was walking out of the Horseshoe with my dad. We had just watched USC, a number 3 or 4 ranked USC team, beat a very highly ranked Ohio State team at their place in front of 100,000 fans behind a freshman quarterback. It's really difficult to beat a team like that at their place with a freshman. I remember we walked outside the stadium on the way to the car. I was commenting to my dad what a tremendous run it had been and how much fun it had been. USC at that point had won 81 of its last 88 games. It had won a couple of national titles. It had won a bunch of Rose Bowls. It had finished 7 years consecutively in the top 4, 3 Heismans. It was one of the great runs in college football in the recent history of college football. And I remember commenting to him, I said, I don't know how long this is going to last. I know it's not going to last forever. I hope it lasts long enough that my son, who is 3 years old, can witness this. He didn't, of course, because that game was sort of the end of Pete Carroll's run. That season went south, the last half of the season. Pete Carroll left to the NFL. The sanctions came. The self-sanctions came when USC hiring Sarkisian and Clay Helton. And over the last 13 years, there's been a whole lot of garbage thrown at USC fans. USC football's been tough to watch. I bring this up. Most of you know this history. I bring this up because this is now the end of 2022. It's the right time to do a year-end review. But the truth is, you can't really talk about where we are or where we're going unless you remember where we've been. One of the great things about the Pete Carroll run, one of the great things about the John McKay run, for those of you who were around then, I was not, is that it was such a contrast to what had come before. I mean, before Pete Carroll came, we had the Ted Tollner years. We had the complete collapse of Larry Smith's program. We had the tragedy that was Paul Hackett. We had all of that, and it got to the point where people were questioning whether USC could ever win again. And it was grim, and people weren't coming to the Coliseum, and it was tough to watch. And then when Pete Carroll turned it around the way he did, it was better. It was more fun. It was more exciting because of where we had been before that. Some of you don't realize that maybe because it was Pete Carroll and Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush who made you USC fans in the first place. You didn't see the stuff that came before. Here's the thing. College football runs in cycles. It always does. I knew eventually the Pete Carroll run would end. It has to. All of the major programs have gone through their down spots. Before Nick Saban came, Alabama was a mess. Oklahoma's had some terrible years prior to Bob Stoops. Notre Dame has had a series of coaches that had bad runs. Michigan, Texas, everybody. This is what college football is all about. It's hard to stay on top all the time. In order to stay on top, you have to have an elite coach. It's almost always the case. And there aren't very many elite coaches. There aren't very many people who can do what you need to do to win consistently at the college level, which is why coaches get paid so much. Because you pay a lot to try to find that guy, and once you get him, you can't let him go. When USC hired Lincoln Riley, what most of us knew is that finally we had hired somebody off the A-list, somebody that probably nobody else in the college football world thought we could land. We were getting a guy that had won 85% of his games, that had been to the playoffs a few times, that had won some Heisman trophies and a bunch of conference championships. And so we knew we were getting somebody, finally, that was the type of prospect that you'd want a blue blood program to hire, rather than hiring again somebody that nobody else would want. So we knew that. There were really 2 big questions that we had to answer about Lincoln Riley. The first one was, can he build his own program? He inherited a pretty good program from Bob Stoops, and he kept it going and probably improved it over where Bob had left it, but he hadn't built it from scratch, and so the first question was whether he could do that. I think we have the answer to that question already. Going from 4-8 to 11-2 is a pretty good sign that Lincoln Riley can build a program. USC is once again a very good football team, winning a lot of games. That question has been answered. The second question has to do with whether Lincoln Riley could build a defense good enough so that if it didn't match the offense that he puts on the field, it was at least in the same class. That question still isn't answered yet. I don't think we know. The reality is that USC's defense was lousy this year. It just was. Other than Oregon State, I'm not sure they put four quarters together in any single game. The defense tackled poorly. At least in the second half of the year, they made just about every quarterback they faced look like Joe Montana in his prime. Okay, it wasn't good. I don't know what that means yet. I don't know that we should jump to any conclusions. The truth is, the defense in 2021 was the worst defense in program history, and it was really, really grim. And so I think you're going to have to give Lincoln Riley a little bit of time to see whether he can build that up. Not playing great defense in the first year after playing so badly before he got there is not exactly shocking, and it's not disqualifying. So the truth is, I don't think we yet know the answer to the question whether Lincoln Riley can build the defense where it needs to be to compete at a national level. Now, I already know that there are two groups of people that are unhappy with me. I started writing for WeAreSC a few years ago in the middle of the Clay Helton debacle because I was frustrated and I wanted a place to air my frustration. I wanted a place where I could tell the truth. And that's what I did for a few years during Helton's reign. I told the truth as best I could and beat on the drum until USC finally did what a lot of us knew they should have done many years before, and that is get rid of Clay Helton and hire a real football coach. Make a real commitment to USC football. It's still my goal to tell the truth as best I can. And so sometimes I'm going to say things like USC played really bad defense last Saturday. It was embarrassing. When I do that, there's a group of fans that get very unhappy because there's always a group of fans that want only cheerleading from us. And so when I say things like that, I'll get a lot of comments like, well, you're not really a USC fan. What's wrong with you? I guess we should bring Clay Helton back, as if I didn't spend years writing about how we needed to get rid of that guy. The second set of fans is on the other side of the spectrum. They're always unhappy. There were fans that were unhappy with Pete Carroll when he was finishing in the top four every single year. There are fans right now that are unhappy with Nick Saban because he didn't make the playoffs. That's just the way it is. And those fans are unhappy with me because I'm not simply stating that USC is failing and Alex Grinch needs to be fired. I just think it's too early to draw those conclusions. So here's what I think we can say. This is really important. I don't know whether Lincoln Riley is going to make USC into a national title football team. There's still a ways to go. But here's what we do know, and I don't want to lose sight of this. USC football is now fun again. And that's important. Look, for Lincoln Riley and his staff, this is a career. For all the rest of us, this is a hobby. USC football is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be something that we put our time and money into because we enjoy it. And for a long while there, USC football was not fun. It was grim. Watching a USC game over the last couple of years before Lincoln Riley arrived was sort of like having to do chores, distasteful chores. And based on the attendance of the Coliseum, there weren't very many people that wanted to do their chores. It was bad. You guys know that. So I want you to take a step back and look at where we are right now. It's not bad. That was a fun season. And the reality is that we know at the very least that Lincoln Riley, who is quite possibly the best offensive football coach in the country, is going to put a team out there that is fast and exciting, scores points, and wins lots of games. The guy didn't luck into an 85% winning percentage. That happens because he has some idea what he's doing. So, in looking at this first year and trying to figure out what to make of it, I don't want to get too hung up on the fact that USC is not yet where we want them to be. I don't even want to get too hung up on the fact that we don't know what the ceiling is yet with Lincoln Riley, whether it's a top 10 program or whether it's competing with Alabama and Georgia for national titles. We don't know that, and right now, my suggestion is don't worry about it. Year one was a tremendous success. I don't think there's any question about that. USC went from terrible to really good and beat some good football teams and played some exciting games, and the trajectory right now is tremendous. So my advice to all of you, let's enjoy the ride. I mean, if you sat there in the Clay Helton years, if you sat there in the Paul Hackett years, if you sat there when Ted Toner won 4 games or Larry Smith won 3, if you sat through all that stuff, how can you not enjoy what we're seeing now? Don't get bogged down in the loss to Utah. It was disappointing. We can still tell the truth about the state of the program. That was a disappointing loss. The defense was a disappointment all year. I hoped they would get better over time. I'm not sure they did. I'm disappointed about that. The recruiting class has some studs in it. I think it's mildly disappointing, but we'll see what happens in the transfer portal. We can still tell the truth about what's going on with the program and the stuff that we're not thrilled about, but I don't want those criticisms to get in the way of just how much fun it is to watch USC football again and how badly we all needed that. I got to sit in the Coliseum in November with my son and my best friend, and I got to watch us beat the Irish. If you sat through that 13-year winless streak like I did, it never gets old beating Notre Dame. And it certainly doesn't get old beating Notre Dame when it's the big game of the week and there's a lot on the line. That's special. So I'm thrilled to death where we are. I can't wait to see what's coming in the future. My year in review is this was a very, very good year. And I can't wait to see what happens next. 2 other thoughts before we close this up. One is we've been talking a little bit about where we used to be because you have to look at where you were in order to really understand where you're going. So because of that, I'm going to start having some guests on this program in the coming weeks and months. I'm going to have some of our former players, some guys that you probably know of, guys like Sammy Knight, Brad Leggett, Shane Foley, and others. These are guys who are going to talk to us a little bit about what the program was like when they were there, share some of their favorite memories, keep some of those old stories alive. I think that's really important. College football does about as well as any sport at maintaining tradition. Tradition and college football really go hand in hand. And especially in these days when college football is changing so much and rivalries are disappearing, bowl games are disappearing, or at least their importance is, conferences are changing. Holding on to what came before, holding on to that tradition is important. I want these guys to help us remember some of that tradition. We'll also talk to them about Lincoln Riley and the program and what they think. They're always going to have interesting insights on that sort of thing. We'll make fun of Oregon, at least I will. And we'll talk to these guys about what they're up to now, because a lot of these guys are doing some really impressive and interesting things, which you would expect from Trojans. And finally, let me close with this. As I said earlier, I started writing for WeAreSC probably 3 years ago, maybe 4 now. I started doing it as a hobby, but I started doing it because I wanted an outlet to say what I think. I appreciate WeAreSC for letting me do that, for letting me continue to write, for letting me continue to do these videos. I think the late, great Gary Paskowitz, a really great Trojan, somebody who loved USC, loved this program, who was kind enough to let me start writing some years ago before he passed away. I thank Gary's mother and his sister for continuing Gary's work on this site, keeping the site alive. Bruce Bagney for jumping in and making a tremendous contribution. The site likely would have folded without his help. I thank Eric McKinney, the editor, for doing what he does and for consistently working with me and tolerating my difficulties and for letting me write what I want without censoring me. I appreciate that. And Greg and Mark and Scott and Kevin, all these guys. I thank the WeAreSC family. This is really a fun place to do what is for me just a hobby, but one I love. And I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the people who read what I write. I want to thank the people who watch what I post up on YouTube. The reality is this is a hobby for me, and I do it because I love it, but it's a whole lot more fun when there are people out there paying attention. Thank you for paying attention. Continue to give me your feedback. Tell me when I'm wrong. Tell me when I'm right. And I hope everybody had a good Christmas, a good 2022. Good luck to the Trojans in the Cotton Bowl.